After arriving home from school, a little girl would start the half-a-mile walk up her driveway to reach her home. The thing is, she never made it. But before we get started, welcome to True Crime with Maneater. If you love all things true crime, including missing person cases, cold cases, and just the strange happenings in the world, you've come to the right place. If you'd like to support the channel, and you know I'd appreciate it, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. Let's get started. Georgia Jean Weckler was last seen on May 1st, 1947, at her home in Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. 8-year-old Georgia lived at home with her family, and they lived on this farm, and it was a pretty rural area at the time. On the day of her disappearance, Georgia and her siblings typically rode their bikes to school, but it had been raining quite a bit, so their father drove them to school that day. After Georgia completed her school day, she was released about half an hour earlier than her older brother and sister. So a neighbor who had gone to pick up her own child that day gave Georgia a ride home. This neighbor would drive Georgia home and drop her off at the bottom of the driveway. And for reference, the driveway was incredibly long. It was about half a mile. Georgia did tell the neighbor that perhaps she would go into the woods and collect some flowers for a May Day basket that she was creating. The neighbor did watch as Georgia grabbed a large bundle of mail and began to walk up her driveway. Unfortunately, after that sighting, Georgia has never been seen or heard from again, and that mail that she was carrying seemingly disappeared as well. Eventually, Georgia's siblings would arrive home, and Georgia's mother wasn't really overall worried about where Georgia was because she assumed that she was just with her father. But when 6 p.m. rolled around and Georgia wasn't home, and her husband was, they began to search for their daughter. Unfortunately, there was no sign of the young girl, but some witnesses would give an account of a suspect. Witnesses would say they saw a dark-colored, possibly black, four-door, 1936 Ford sedan with a gray plastic spotlight in the vicinity that afternoon. And then seemingly the car vanished at the same time that Georgia did. And the thing is, deep tire tracks were later found on the road, seemingly as if the vehicle had pulled out fast. Witnesses would say the car was driven by a blonde man, 20 to 25 years old. Although this man was the prime suspect in Georgia's disappearance, nobody seems to know who he is. They couldn't even identify this person. Of course, police did question numerous people that matched witness statements, but they really had no leads. Many witnesses would even report seeing a young girl struggling and pleading with a man inside a similar vehicle in Fort Atkinson shortly after she vanished. Unfortunately, nobody could confirm if this child had been Georgia, but they would say that she closely resembled her. Due to the fact that Georgia's father was a public official and a man of means, police initially thought that perhaps the little girl was kidnapped for ransom. But days and then weeks passed, and no ransom demands were made. What's really strange about this case is prior to her disappearance, Georgia, who remember is an 8-year-old child in the 3rd grade, continued to make remarks about being terrified of being kidnapped. I don't have children and I don't spend a lot of time around children, but I assume an 8-year-old isn't going to be scared of being kidnapped, especially to continue to make remarks about it. To me, something stands out that someone had either scared her or put the idea in her head, or I don't know, maybe her parents had talked to her about stranger danger. Just something about that comment stands out to me. But in the fall of 1947, somebody would confess to her murder. Buford Sennett was a convicted rapist and murderer, and he had just started serving his life sentence in prison when he confessed to murdering Georgia. Buford would say that him and another person, who he wouldn't name or tell the police who that person was, claimed that they kidnapped Georgia for ransom purposes. He would say that he gave her some sleeping pills, but she accidentally overdosed and died. He would say that he threw Georgia's body into the Blue River near the town of Blue River, Wisconsin. But a search of the river turned up no signs of Georgia. But when police searched the woods near his former hideout, they did find some ashes. And they did forensically test them because a woman claimed that she did see them burn Georgia's body. But apparently nothing came of the forensic testing. He was never charged in connection with Georgia's case, and eventually he would recant his statement. Unfortunately, he was paroled in 1974. And of course, he went on to harm more people. He would assault 2 young girls, and by 1987, he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. Buford Sennett died in a Wisconsin prison in 2008, but he wasn't the only person to confess to Georgia's kidnapping and murder. Apparently, a number of other individuals did, including a convicted murderer from Nebraska, except nothing could be proven against any of them, and most of them later recanted. And then in 1957, 10 years after the little girl went missing, her case would make national news again. But this time, it was because a serial killer known as Ed Gein had been arrested. Of course, most of us know about Ed Gein, but brief summary, police went to his farmhouse and they just uncovered a horror show there. There were numerous body parts and items such as lampshades made from human skin. Although Gein is considered a possible suspect in Georgia's disappearance, she still has never been found. And she doesn't fit the profile for Gein's known victims. The people he killed were middle-aged women. And of course, Gein didn't match the description of the man believed to be Georgia's abductor, but he did own a black 1937 Ford. Unfortunately, Georgia's case remains unsolved. So authorities do believe now that she was probably abducted by a sexual predator. But I still can't get the idea out of my mind that she was very concerned about being kidnapped. Had she been spooked by somebody riding to and from school one day? I mean, it was well known that she did ride her bike. So if somebody was watching the children, because she had siblings, her older brother and sister rode along with her, I guess, perhaps they realized that they had a chance to take her. Perhaps they had been watching the siblings for a long time. And on that day, the neighbor picks her up from school, she drives her home, and leaves her at the end of this really long driveway. So of course, if they've been watching this little girl and her siblings aren't around, it seems like the prime time to abduct the child. So she gets, started up the driveway, they grab her, they run to the car, they throw her in, and they drive away. It is a possibility. Buford Sennett, who said that he did abduct her with another accomplice and that they were going to use her for ransom money, and she died, because they gave her too many sleeping pills and then they threw the body in the river. Of course, he could have actually done that and then recanted his story, but there was no evidence of it. And then obviously other people have confessed to the crime over the years, but again, no evidence. I really do feel like this was a stranger abduction. But what is strange is this kind of car and person seemingly disappeared. So were they not a local person? Did they live outside of town? Had they been passing through? They got, fixated on this little girl and started watching her and her siblings and kind of waited for, the right time. Or were they a neighbor or somebody that lived in the area and they kind of just slipped under the radar? It is incredibly sad that this little girl grabbed her mail and started the journey up her driveway and then was snatched and never ever was found or brought back home. But I'd love to know your thoughts on this case. What happened to Georgia? That's it for today, guys. If you like this video or any other video on my channel, be sure to subscribe and turn on alerts so you never miss video upload. If there's a case you'd like me to cover, pop it in the comments below and I'll be sure to get to it. In the meantime, check out some other videos on my channel while you wait for the next upload, and I'll see you then.